Ex-husband's shocking decision leaves ex-wife questioning everything. What is he planning now? Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main characters. James Walker and Emily Walker had always been an ordinary couple, or so it seemed. Their relationship, which had once been filled with love and promises, had gradually crumbled over the years. They had their fair share of struggles, like any couple, but no one could have predicted the shocking turn their lives would take. James, the ex-husband, had always been known as the reliable one, the one who kept his emotions in check. Emily, on the other hand, was the emotional heart of their relationship. She had always worn her heart on her sleeve, which made their connection deep, but also fragile. Their divorce, while not a happy one, was supposed to be the end of the story. Or so Emily thought. She had started to rebuild her life, focusing on her career, her friends, and finding a sense of independence she had longed for during their marriage. But that was before James made a decision that left Emily questioning everything. It started with a simple phone call. James wanted to meet. He claimed it was important, but he didn't say why. Emily, curious but cautious, agreed. She had no idea what was about to unfold. As they sat across from each other at the same cafe where they had shared so many memories, James looked different. He seemed calmer, more composed than she had ever seen him. His usual demeanor, which was often marked by an underlying tension, was nowhere to be found. Emily couldn't help but wonder what had changed. The conversation started off small, with James asking how she had been. But soon, he dropped the bombshell. He was moving across the country. He had accepted a job offer in a different state, a position he couldn't refuse. Emily felt her heart sink. Why was he telling her this now? After everything they had been through, why was he making such a drastic change? It didn't make sense. James explained that it wasn't just about the job. He had been given an opportunity to start fresh, to leave behind the life they had built together. Emily's mind raced with questions. Why now? Why so suddenly? And most importantly, what did this mean for her? Hadn't they both agreed that the past was behind them? Why was he still affecting her life in this way? As the conversation continued, Emily's confusion grew. James's decision wasn't just about him. It was about their past, their shared memories, and the life they had once dreamed of. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was going on. Something was happening, and James wasn't telling her the whole truth. She tried to push those thoughts aside, but they lingered, eating away at her. What was he planning now? And why was it all happening so suddenly? Emily sat there, her mind racing as she processed James's words. The cafe, once a place of warmth and shared memories, now felt cold and distant. She tried to keep her composure, but the questions swirling in her head were impossible to ignore. Why had he chosen this moment to drop such a bombshell? What was he really trying to tell her? As the minutes ticked by, she felt like the ground beneath her was slowly slipping away. James was moving on, but was he really leaving her behind? Or was there something more to this than just a job offer? She could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating, as she searched for the right words to respond. Finally she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. Why now, James? Why so suddenly? James looked at her, his expression unreadable. He didn't seem to be bothered by her question, but Emily could see a flicker of something in his eyes, something she couldn't quite place. It's just time, he said, his tone calm but distant. I need to move forward, to take control of my life again. His words stung, but Emily couldn't quite put her finger on why. Was he truly moving on, or was there something more he wasn't telling her? The silence between them stretched on, thick and uncomfortable, as Emily tried to make sense of everything. But what about us? She asked, the words escaping before she could stop them. James hesitated, his gaze shifting briefly to the floor before meeting her eyes again. There is no us anymore, Emily. That's why this is happening. His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it now. The finality of his words hit Emily like a ton of bricks. She felt a wave of emotions flood over her, anger, sadness, and confusion. She had thought they were both moving forward, that their lives were separate, but this felt like a door being slammed shut, a chapter being permanently closed. The weight of the moment hung heavy in the air as she tried to process everything he had just said. But why did you have to tell me now? She asked, her voice breaking slightly. Why not before? James leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving hers. Because I wanted you to know that I'm serious. I'm done with the past. I'm done with us. His words were sharp, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of regret, perhaps, that made Emily question whether he truly meant them. She had always known James to be a man of few words, but these words were different. They were final. The conversation shifted into uncomfortable silence once again. Emily could feel the weight of their shared history bearing down on her. She thought about their life together, the years they had spent building a future, only to see it crumble in front of her. But was this really the end? Or was there more to this story than James was letting on? As she sat there, staring at him, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. James's sudden decision to move across the country didn't make sense, not completely. Was it just about the job, or was there something else at play here? Emily had to know the truth. She needed to understand what was really going on. She wasn't sure what he was hiding, but she was certain he was hiding something. This wasn't just about a job offer. It was about something much deeper, something that James wasn't ready to reveal yet. And Emily was determined to find out what it was. The next few days were a blur for Emily. She couldn't stop thinking about the conversation with James. What had started as a casual coffee meeting had turned into a turning point in her life, and she was left with more questions than answers. She tried to push the thoughts aside and focus on her work, but it was impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face, calm and distant, telling her that their relationship was over. But there was something in the way he spoke, something in the way his eyes flickered when he said those words, that made Emily doubt his certainty. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something. Emily spent hours replaying their conversation over and over in her mind, searching for any clue that might explain why he had decided to move away so suddenly. Was it just about the job? Or was there something more going on? She knew James well enough to recognize when he was holding something back, and this time, it felt like he was keeping a part of the story from her. She had to find out the truth. Emily decided to take matters into her own hands. She knew James's phone number by heart, and though she hesitated, she couldn't ignore the growing need to get answers. Late one evening, she picked up her phone and dialed his number. It rang several times before he picked up. Hello? James's voice was steady, but there was a slight edge to it, like he had been expecting this call. James, it's Emily, she said, trying to sound casual, though her heart was racing. I've been thinking about our conversation the other day, and I need to understand more. You're really leaving? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Emily could feel his hesitation, and for a moment she thought he might hang up. But then he spoke. Emily, I told you everything you need to know. His voice was firm, but there was something else in it, something that made Emily's stomach tighten. No, James, she replied, her voice shaking slightly. You didn't. There's more to this, I know there is. Please tell me what's really going on. Why now? Why so suddenly? There was another pause, longer this time. Emily could hear him sigh, and she held her breath, waiting for him to speak. I don't want to do this over the phone, he finally said. But you're right. There's something more. But it's not something I can explain in a few sentences. I think you need to hear it in person. Emily's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. The truth was finally within reach. When? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tomorrow. I'll meet you at the same place we met before. 2 p.m. He hung up without another word. Emily sat in stunned silence, the weight of what had just happened sinking in. She knew this conversation would change everything. It was clear now that James had more to say, more to reveal. But what could it be? What was he hiding? And why was he so determined to keep it from her? As the day of the meeting drew closer, Emily's mind was consumed by questions. She felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation, unsure of what to expect. One thing was certain, whatever James was about to tell her would change the course of their lives forever. She just had to wait a little longer to find out. The next afternoon, Emily found herself sitting at the same cafe where everything had started to unravel. The same cafe where she and James had shared countless moments, both good and bad. It was strange to be here again, knowing that everything had changed. She had arrived early, her nerves getting the best of her. The weight of the conversation she was about to have was almost too much to bear. The minutes seemed to drag on as she waited for James to arrive. She checked the time on her phone again, 2 p.m. exactly. She wondered what he was going to say. Was it going to be the truth she had been searching for? Or would it be more lies, more evasions? As if on cue, James walked through the door. He looked just as calm and composed as he had before, but this time, there was something different in his eyes. Something guarded. He scanned the room for a moment before spotting her at a corner table. He walked over, his footsteps deliberate, and sat down across from her. "Hey," he said simply, his voice calm but strained. Emily looked at him, trying to read his expression, but it was as if he had closed himself off. She had never felt so far away from him, even though they were sitting just a few feet apart. "James," she replied, her voice steady but unsure. "You said you had something to tell me. Something important." He nodded, his fingers tapping nervously on the table. "Yeah," he said. "I do. But it's not easy to talk about." Emily's heart raced. She could tell he was struggling with this, but it only made her more anxious. What was so hard to say? What could be so important that he had to meet her in person? "James, you're scaring me," she admitted, her voice cracking slightly. "What's going on? What's really happening?" James took a deep breath, his eyes finally meeting hers. "I didn't want to hurt you, Emily. But I realize now that I've kept things from you. Things I should have told you a long time ago." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. She didn't know what to expect, but this wasn't what she had imagined. She had expected him to talk about the job, about the move, but not this. Not a confession. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James hesitated for a moment, his gaze shifting to the window as if searching for the right words. "It's about the divorce," he said finally. "It wasn't just about us growing apart. There was more to it, something I didn't tell you. Something I was ashamed of." Emily's breath caught in her throat. What could he possibly be ashamed of? They had both made mistakes during their marriage, but she had never imagined that James had something he was hiding. "James, what are you talking about?" she asked, feeling a knot tighten in her stomach. He sighed deeply, his shoulders slumping slightly. "I never wanted you to know, but I think you deserve the truth. The real reason I pushed for the divorce wasn't just because we were unhappy. It was because I felt trapped. I felt like I was living someone else's life, and I didn't know how to get out of it. So, I made a decision to leave. I didn't know how else to fix things, so I thought that leaving would be the only way to find myself again." Emily stared at him, stunned. She had never imagined that this was the reason behind their divorce. She had always thought it was about their issues, their struggles, their differences, but this was something else entirely. This was about his own sense of identity, his own personal crisis. "But why didn't you tell me this before?" she asked, her voice barely audible. James looked down at his hands, his fingers twisting nervously. "I was scared, Emily. I didn't want to hurt you. I thought that if I told you the truth, it would make everything worse. But now I see that keeping it from you only made things harder. I'm sorry." The weight of his words hung heavy in the air, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Emily felt a mixture of emotions: anger, betrayal, confusion. But above all, she felt a deep sense of sadness. The man she had loved, the man she had married, was not the person she thought he was. And now, everything had changed. She didn't know how to feel, or what to do with this new information. James was not the same person he had been when they were together, and neither was she. And now, she had to figure out what came next. Emily sat there, processing James's words. The air between them had grown heavy with unspoken emotions. His confession about feeling trapped and needing to find himself had shaken her to the core. She had spent years in their marriage, thinking they were both just dealing with the everyday struggles that most couples face. But this was different. This was about him, his own internal battles, his own desires that had nothing to do with their relationship. She felt a sharp pang in her chest. She had loved him, and she had believed they were building a life together, but now she realized that their paths had already started diverging long before their divorce. James looked up, his eyes searching hers, as if waiting for her response. But Emily didn't know what to say. She wasn't sure what she was feeling anymore. Part of her was angry that he hadn't been honest with her from the start, that he had kept these feelings to himself, that he had allowed their marriage to fall apart instead of confronting the issues head-on. But another part of her was heartbroken. Heartbroken that the man she had once loved was no longer the person she thought he was. She had spent so much time trying to make sense of their failed marriage, trying to pinpoint what went wrong, but now it felt like the answers she had been looking for were being thrown at her all at once. She felt like she was losing her grip on everything. "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" Emily asked, her voice low and strained. "Why keep this from me? We could have worked through this. We could have found a way." James's face softened, and for a moment, Emily saw a glimpse of the man she once knew. "I thought I was doing what was best for both of us," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I didn't want to hurt you. I thought if I left, it would be easier. I thought I could fix myself, figure things out, and then maybe we could be better apart. But I see now that I was wrong." Emily's mind was racing, trying to process everything he had just said. She had spent so much time trying to fix things, trying to salvage a relationship that, in the end, was already broken. But was it really broken? Or had James just been too afraid to admit what he was feeling? "So what now?" she asked, finally finding her voice. "What happens next? You're still leaving, aren't you?" James nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to the table. "Yeah, I'm still leaving. I need to go. But I don't want you to think this is the end of everything. I never wanted to destroy what we had. I'm just lost. I don't know how to make it right." Emily swallowed hard. The emotions swirling inside her were overwhelming. She wasn't sure what she wanted anymore. She didn't know if she was ready to let go of the past or if she even could. But one thing was clear: this conversation had brought her face to face with the truth. It wasn't just about their marriage falling apart. It was about two people trying to find their way in a world that had changed them both. She wasn't sure where they would go from here, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't stay in the past. She had to move forward. But as she looked at James, she couldn't help but wonder if he was doing the same. Was he really ready to leave everything behind, or was he just running from the person he had become? As the silence stretched on between them, Emily realized that the answers she needed might not be as simple as she had hoped. She didn't have all the answers yet, but one thing was certain: she had to face the future, even if it meant letting go of the past. Emily spent the next few days trying to make sense of everything James had said. She couldn't shake the image of him sitting across from her, confessing his feelings, the man she had once loved, now a stranger in some ways. But as time went on, the anger began to fade, replaced by a quiet sadness. The kind of sadness that comes when you realize that the person you thought you knew was never really the person you thought they were. She had spent so much time trying to understand what went wrong, trying to piece together the fragments of their broken marriage, but now she was left with nothing but questions. Was it really just his own personal struggle that had driven him away? Or was there something deeper, something she hadn't seen? Emily's thoughts kept circling back to one thing: the future. Her future. She knew she couldn't keep living in the past, constantly questioning what had gone wrong, constantly wondering what could have been. She had to move on, even if the path ahead was uncertain. It wasn't going to be easy, but she knew she had no other choice. The next time she saw James, she was determined to have closure. It wasn't about forgiving him. It was about accepting that things had changed and that their lives were going in different directions. It was about letting go of the hope that things could somehow go back to the way they were. A few days later, Emily met James again, this time at a park near her apartment. She had suggested it, wanting to avoid the familiarity of the cafe where their past seemed to linger in the air. As James approached, Emily could see the same expression on his face, calm, but distant. He looked as if he had made peace with everything, but Emily wasn't sure she had. "Hi," James said, his voice soft, but there was a heaviness in it now. Emily nodded, not sure what to say. The silence between them wasn't as uncomfortable as it had been before, but it still felt thick, as if there was a lot left unsaid. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," Emily finally spoke, her voice steady but cautious. "And I've realized something. I need to stop looking for answers in the past. We both made mistakes, and I think we've both been holding on to something that doesn't exist anymore." James didn't say anything at first, just watched her with a look of understanding in his eyes. "You're right," he said finally. "I've been running for so long, trying to fix things that I couldn't fix. But I've realized that running away doesn't solve anything. I need to face the reality of what's happened, and so do you." Emily took a deep breath. She wasn't sure if she was ready to fully let go, but in that moment, she felt something shift within her. Maybe it was the realization that she had already been holding on to the past for too long. Maybe it was the fact that she was finally ready to move forward. "I've spent so much time blaming myself," she admitted quietly. "But I can't keep doing that. We both played a part in what happened, and I need to accept that." James nodded, his eyes softening. "I've blamed myself too," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But it's not about blaming anyone anymore. It's about moving forward. And I think we both deserve that." Emily looked at him for a moment, searching his face for any signs of the man she had once known. For a brief second, she thought she saw a glimpse of that person, someone she could have loved, someone she had loved. But then the moment passed, and she realized that the man sitting before her wasn't the same person she had married. He had changed, just as she had. They both had. "I'm glad we talked," Emily said softly, her voice filled with a quiet resolve. "I think it's time we both let go of the past." James gave her a small smile, a sad one, but a smile nonetheless. "Yeah, me too," he said quietly. They stood there for a few moments, the weight of everything between them hanging in the air. But Emily felt a sense of peace settle in her heart. It wasn't the closure she had expected, but it was closure nonetheless. They had said their goodbyes, and now it was time to move forward. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was ready to face it. Weeks passed after Emily and James had their final conversation. The days felt longer at times, as if the weight of their past was still lingering, but slowly, Emily began to feel lighter. She threw herself into her work, reconnecting with old friends, and rediscovering parts of herself she had put aside during her marriage. It wasn't easy, but with each passing day, the sense of peace she had found in their last meeting began to settle deeper within her. One evening, as she sat at home, she received a text from James. It was brief, just a simple message saying, "I hope you're doing well." Emily stared at the screen for a long moment. She hadn't expected to hear from him again, not after everything. But as she read his words, something shifted inside her. She felt no anger, no resentment, just a quiet acceptance of everything that had happened. She typed a quick response. "I'm doing better. I hope you are too." She put her phone down and let out a deep breath, surprised at how easy it was to respond. In the past, she would have been torn, unsure of what to say, but now, she simply felt calm. She wasn't holding on to anything anymore. It was as if the space between her and James had finally closed, not because they had resolved everything, but because they had both come to terms with who they were now. A few days later, Emily decided to go for a walk in the park to clear her mind. The weather was starting to warm up, the first signs of spring in the air. As she strolled along the path, she found herself reflecting on the journey she had been on. It hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. The pain of the past had faded into a quiet understanding, and she realized that she was no longer living for the version of herself that had been tied to James. She was living for herself, for the person she had become. She paused by a small bench, looking out at the calm water in front of her. The sky was turning golden with the setting sun, and for the first time in a long while, Emily felt truly at peace. It was then that she realized. She had forgiven herself. She had forgiven herself for the mistakes she had made, for holding on to a relationship that was no longer healthy, for letting fear dictate her choices. She had freed herself from the weight of her past. As she sat there, the soft breeze brushing against her face, Emily smiled. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew she was ready for it. She had learned to let go of what she couldn't change and embrace the freedom that came with it. Her journey wasn't over, but she was finally on the path she was meant to be on. She stood up, feeling lighter than she had in years, and began walking again, not toward any particular destination, but simply forward. With each step, she moved further away from the past, toward a future full of possibility. She didn't know exactly where she was going, but for the first time in a long time, that was okay. Emily was no longer looking back. She was looking ahead, and that was all that mattered. Months passed, and Emily's life slowly began to feel more in balance. The ache from her past was still there, but it was quieter now, softer. She had come to terms with the fact that some things would always be a part of her, but they didn't have to control her. The future felt full of possibilities, and she was learning to embrace that uncertainty. Emily had made a conscious decision to move forward, to take the lessons from her past and apply them to her present. Her job had taken on a new significance, not just as a career but as a way to carve out a space for herself. She was no longer just living day to day, she was building something entirely her own. One evening, after a long day at work, Emily was sitting on her couch, sipping tea, when she received a call. It was from a number she didn't recognize, but something told her to answer. "Hello?" she said, her voice calm but curious. "Emily, it's James," came the voice on the other end. Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't spoken to him in months, but hearing his voice again felt strangely familiar. "James, I didn't expect to hear from you." There was a brief pause before he spoke again, his tone softer than it had been the last time they spoke. "I know. I've been thinking a lot, and I wanted to reach out. I hope I'm not interrupting anything." Emily hesitated. She had come so far in letting go of the past, but the lingering thoughts of James were still there. She took a deep breath and replied, "No, you're not interrupting. What's going on?" "I just wanted to check in," he said, a slight hesitation in his voice. "I've been doing a lot of reflection, and I realized that I never properly apologized for how things ended between us. I'm sorry, Emily, for not being honest with you. For not being there when you needed me." The sincerity in his voice surprised her. She had never expected this, but hearing him apologize, hearing him admit his shortcomings, felt like a piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Emily swallowed hard, unsure of how to respond. "James, I appreciate that. I really do. But I think we've both had our time to reflect. We can't change what happened, and I've learned to let go of the past. I'm okay now." There was a long pause on the other end, and for a moment, Emily wondered if the silence meant he didn't understand. But then he spoke again, his voice soft. "I'm glad to hear that. I just wanted you to know that I'm okay too. I'm not perfect, but I'm working on becoming a better person. I hope you're doing the same." Emily felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She wasn't expecting any grand reconciliation, but this moment felt like a quiet acknowledgement that both of them had grown. "I am," she said, her voice steady. "And I hope you find what you're looking for, James." They both sat in silence for a few seconds, and Emily realized that she wasn't holding on to any lingering bitterness or regret. It was just a conversation between two people who had once been close but had now moved on in different ways. "Take care, Emily," James finally said. "You too," she replied. The call ended, and Emily sat back, letting out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. It wasn't a dramatic moment, but it was a peaceful one. She had no idea what the future held for her, but she knew that she was no longer carrying the past with her. As she looked out the window, watching the sun set, she smiled. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. Months turned into a year, and Emily found herself in a new chapter of her life. She had truly moved on, not just in the sense of distancing herself from her past, but in the deeper sense of embracing the person she had become. She had put herself first, rediscovered old passions, and had learned to appreciate her own company. One afternoon, while walking through the city, Emily felt the familiar sense of calm wash over her as she passed by the park where she and James had last met. It felt like a lifetime ago, and yet, the memories were still vivid. But they no longer hurt. They no longer defined her. She had taken control of her own story. Her career was flourishing, and she had even started dating again, something she hadn't thought she was ready for just a few months earlier. Emily had learned that moving forward didn't mean forgetting, it meant accepting and growing from the past. One evening, she was sitting at a cafe, reading a book, when her phone buzzed. It was a message from her best friend, Sarah. "How's the dating scene?" Sarah had been encouraging Emily to explore new relationships, but Emily had been cautious, wanting to make sure she was ready. Emily smiled as she typed her reply. "It's going well. I'm taking things slow." She hit send and went back to her book. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel any pressure to be anything other than herself. The following weekend, Emily attended a gathering hosted by an old colleague. It was casual, relaxed, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a spark of excitement when she met someone new. His name was Ben, and there was something easy about their conversation. He wasn't like James, but he was kind, funny, and shared similar interests. As the evening unfolded, Emily realized that she wasn't comparing Ben to James, she was simply enjoying the moment. It was refreshing, and for the first time in a long while, Emily felt like she was truly living. The next few weeks were filled with laughter, new experiences, and the slow building of a connection with Ben. Emily didn't rush things. She had learned that the best relationships weren't ones she could force. They were ones that grew naturally, with time and understanding. She often reflected on how far she had come, how much stronger and more self-aware she was. The person she had been in her marriage was no longer who she was today. She had evolved, and in that evolution, she had found her own voice. One evening, as she sat at home, scrolling through photos on her phone, she came across an old picture of her and James. For a moment, she paused, staring at the image. It was a picture from happier times, when they had first met. The love they had shared seemed so innocent and full of promise. But then, as quickly as the thought came, Emily smiled to herself and put the phone down. It was a memory, nothing more. A chapter in her story that had been necessary, but one that no longer held any power over her. She was ready for what came next. Life was full of opportunities, and Emily was finally living it, without looking back. As she closed her eyes, a sense of peace settled over her. She was exactly where she was meant to be, and for the first time in a long time, she felt completely at peace with that. The future was hers to create, and she was ready to take on whatever it held.